One thing our apologetic and outreach ministry is known for is defining, documenting, and disclosing fallible elements within fallible religious constructs. And that's certainly through an evaluative process. We don't say we're sorry for evaluating assertions, even our own. And we approach the Bible, for example, as any text, as an interpreter would do. We assume that what we are bringing to the text might be wrong. It may not have been posited out from the text originally. It could just be something we've been told or what we've heard said. So in evaluating atheism, for example, the feedback is quite remarkable in that the atheists their error of omission is the presuppositional knowledge they would have of God in order to declare, according to some undefined criteria, our lack of evidence for God. For example, when it can be demonstrated in history that a book thousands of years ago has knowledge and information in it from which theologians could develop branches of that theology, if you will, sub-branches, lesser branches, let's say physics, calculus, and chemistry. And those are understood, and it's self-evident. Anyone can do just a cursory research investigation, that is, and one can ascertain quickly the origin of the fields of science from theology. One can see the utilitarian benefit of translating the Bible into English by William Tyndale, accused a Baptist. That is, Baptist as an accusation refers to those who did not receive license or to preach or to even administer baptism, but conducted independently of state-established religions. So as the Western world and Western civilizations come into existence, when you assert these things, an atheist will just say, that's still not evidence for God. Now, they don't notice that they're begging the question, how would you know, according to what criteria are you establishing a lack of evidence? Well, then if you proceed, for example, Harvard University, first president, Baptist preacher, you go back to the early framers of our nation, Thomas Jefferson, as late as 2012 in a biography by John Meacham, The Art of Power, Thomas Jefferson, The Art of Power, he mentions the Danbury Baptist Association. The Baptists collaborated with our political scientists who framed our nation's political documents and declarations and bills of rights, acknowledging the inalienability, the inalienable nature of those rights. The right to peaceably assemble. But when you begin to speak of these things, and then even notice the Baptists worked with the political founders and scientists who founded our nation to disestablish religion, that is, the state-established religion, and Baptists walked on the Trail of Tears. Baptists have a record of martyrologies. But as you continue to demonstrate all this, atheists just say, there's no evidence for God. You haven't proved God's real. Now, what they have omitted and unintentionally negated themselves, the word atheist has a prefix, negative particle, so they, in function, negate God. One recently, a young person, I suppose, maybe, I can't tell, but they said if I don't believe in Thor, that I would then be called an atheist. Of course, he had to go use a non-existent, iconic character to use as an illustration, which was quite remarkable. But I asked, as I've asked on numerous occasions, what is your criteria for evidence for God? Because they know not to answer that, because how would you know that? And then it's certainly not a very high level of critical thought for them to say that I can't prove or I cannot satisfy an evidence for God, but physics works, calculus works, chemistry works, the field of theology from which those sub-branches originated and were derived worked. What we have today, the inalienable rights, for example, in this United States, was not originated from atheism nor by atheists. The desire for separation of church and state was certainly shared by atheists with us as Baptists, that large category of people who did not wish to practice our faith. but in accordance with our freedom of conscience, thought, and speech. So really, everything that's been accomplished that affords us the freedom of conscience, thought, and speech has been facilitated by the followers of the God that the atheist, without a book, without a field of theology, without sub-branches of that field, physics, calculus, chemistry, without a historical demonstration of the establishment of what we know today in the United States of America. It's quite remarkable now, just poof, out of nowhere, they wish us to assume they have a criteria, and like their assertion that what we know as creation just poof is here. Out from nothing, something came, which is quite remarkable for them to say that. And then to say there's no purpose, no design, no intention, there's no concept of God that can ever be demonstrated to their satisfaction, except it just begs the question, and they commit that fallacious error in argumentation. It's begging the question, well, what is your criteria? So I've asked, what is your criteria? How would you know anyone that considers him or herself an atheist? How do you know the criteria? How do you know that reality, as we assert and demonstrate, and even the conflicts we have today to defend ourselves against state governments or states, absolutely, that establish religion? For example, the Judaic state or the Catholic state or the Islamic state or whatever those things are. The word state is the concern, and in this country, as demonstrated by the wisdom of believers, and that we attribute to the God that the atheists say we haven't proved exist. Again, it begs that question, where's your criteria? Because I would love to evaluate their criteria, because for them to know how to prove if God exists or not, they'd have to have some knowledge of the God that they are denying. And then to know that even in the field of abstract thinking, like philosophy, where even good philosophers can admit that they cannot even prove their own existence, mind-independent, that is, a mind-independent existence, they can't even prove by their own reasoning if they exist or not, if everything's just some illusion or perception. Even time, critical thinking in abstract contemplation in philosophical arenas, for example. One person, a philosopher, even asserted, well, I may never be able to prove God according to the certainty of mathematics, for example. Well, he has a disconnect in that assertion from the origin of mathematics. Math is a root word for disciple in the Greek New Testament. In all of our fields of science, the Greek words in our New Testament are the words according to which those sciences are communicated. Bio, logos, biology, that's just one tiny little example. But it's remarkable. Absolutely no criteria, just poof. They have a criteria that is undefined, so we can't evaluate it. I can't define, document, and disclose the fallible elements in it. But according to it, they make very outlandish assertions. So we do have evidence for God. Also, we have a demonstration of that evidence. Physics works, calculus works, chemistry works. The president of Harvard University, the first president, a Baptist preacher. We have evidence that there's nothing in history that shows something irrational about those who've accomplished what is so unsurpassed today. So if someone says, well, I'm an atheist and you can't prove God exists, well, what they're saying is the evidence for God as history and as we assert it and teach it so easily and so authoritatively, especially for the betterment of our fellow man, not for the enslavement. And as Christians, for 2,000 years, we've never supported the establishment of any religion, since according to that, we've always been persecuted. So if you ever study the Baptists, you say, well, you talk as though the Baptists know everything or are right about everything. Well, that's true. That's true. And even those who would say otherwise have then begged the question, what's your criteria for denouncing the reality of martyrs and the fact that history, even in the United States, shows us willing to preach, announce, and proclaim a freedom for our neighbor that is inalienable, that cannot be thwarted or absconded by another person. So if we have no inalienable rights, then from whom do our rights extend? And that definitely would be a problem for an atheist, because for them to then deny that we have evidence for God, then you'd have to ask, and I'm asking now, all atheists, any atheist, whether it be the neo-atheist Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, Richard Dawkins, the late Christopher Hitchens, whatever all this is, I would love to hear it, because I would then ask, what was the origin of that criteria? How do you know I haven't proven God exists? That's beautiful, because I absolutely know for a fact that we have proven not only that He exists, but we can demonstrate it. So atheist has no book, no fields of science. Physics is not theirs. Calculus is not theirs. Chemistry is not theirs. Technology is not theirs. Now, we certainly extend that, and people avail themselves of it and benefit from it. But to just out of nowhere just begin to make an empty assertion that somehow, now the God believed by the theologians and the God asserted in the field of theology and the God asserted by those who developed calculus, chemistry, and physics. You'd have to imagine someone trying to talk to Leibniz today and then tell him that he has no proof for the existence of God while he is there working out calculus and formulating this in a repeatable, demonstrable manner according to which the constant outcomes and the repeatability of it are beyond question. I'm certain it's because today atheism is unaware of its lack of criteria according to which they denounce anything as evidence for God. And a lot of Christians are not trained and aren't quite equipped to realize before you begin to exasperate yourself and be played by someone, whether they call themselves an atheist or a religionist who says you must perform for the deity, a Baptist will tell you that we're justified out from the faith of Christ, the faithfulness of Christ. So we believed into Him in order that we might be justified out from His faithfulness, not out from adhering to some performance standard prescribed by some religionist who's not even doing it. I mean, we can tell you, Baptists will tell you in a heartbeat that those who are telling you to keep some kind of law aren't even doing it themselves. They're just wanting you to be subservient to them, and then they're in control. And the word control is from the word Lord, and that lordship belongs only to Christ, back to the inalienable right and liberty we have to live according to the freedom of our conscience, thought, and speech, and according to the God of the field of theology, who demonstrably has expressed knowledge through physics, calculus, and chemistry that is unsurpassed in every way. And now the technology, which is just another subproduct of that, so sub-branches of science, which are sub-branches of, theology. So science is a product of theology. Evolution is not a field of science. It's simply an assertion where someone is saying, I'm observing evolutionary processes ongoing, except none of them can be observed by their own definition. The time spans imposed onto the reality they assert that they're observing, which again, they can't prove that it's actually there as a mind-independent thing, which is strange. They can't even prove the thing they're claiming to observe, because they had to first assume we could know reality. Well, since we can, and they've even assumed they can, and since we can demonstrate evidence for God, but they magically, an imaginary assertion out from between their ears, say that we haven't met some evidential criteria. What is it? And then how would you know that? And please, I would love to have feedback. We, like my professor teaches, that is a retired professor, Dr. John Penn, he welcomes feedback. He'd love to hear people give him their evidence criteria. One of my professors was an engineer and is an engineer. He would love to hear the criteria according to which we can determine whether or not the evidence or the demand or the provision of evidence has been met. I mean, have you satisfied the criteria? Well, what would that be? Because it's atheists who say we haven't proven God or we don't have evidence are like religionists. We just can't seem to satisfy them. Well, that's the whole point. Baptists will come and tell you in the name of Jesus Christ, for example, as Jesus did, come out from among them. He said, come unto me if you're heavy laden and weary. Well, yeah, they put these things on you, but how could an atheist place anything on me? I'm not in any way encumbered to try to meet some undefined, irrational criteria that they constantly say, somehow my evidence for God has not risen to the level of their imagination. So it's like a religious leader saying, you can't go to heaven because our religion says you haven't met these standards and these performance standards, and here's the outcomes, and you'll need to go back and redo this or do something about that. And those of us who preach the gospel, the good news, and we preach a person who actually lived in our time and space, his time and space. It was his. He put us into this time and space. Matter of fact, history is BC and AD. So again, religious people say, "Oh, you can never. You got to keep trying to get to heaven." And atheists will say, "Keep trying to prove God." Well, I have no idea. That's silly to a Baptist. It's living in saying that we should take our country and go back to a union between church and state, or that we would be advocating the establishment of religion by the state. That's absurd. So for us who know the truth, that's unconcealed reality. We're waiting, and atheists are like religionists. They have blind spots. They commit errors of omission, and they absolutely have nothing. They have no evidence. They have no book, no fields of science. They have no technology that was product of the branches of theology, sub-branches, that is, physics, calculus, and chemistry. They have no field of theology. They have no Western world and civilization that they were used by the God who created us to establish. And yet we live in the United States with the largest military of all militaries combined to defend this small, if you will, population of the earth. Only 300 million approximately here in the United States, perhaps, something like that. But why do we have such a massive military? Well, because of the egregious acts against the inalienable rights of people. And our very first one is the freedom of speech and peaceably assemble. To peaceably assemble, that's from the word ecclesia, church. That's our word. That's the word Baptists use, the right for people to assemble peaceably and to worship in that capacity according to the freedom of their conscience, thought, and speech. So anyway, don't be any more exasperated by atheists saying you haven't proven God exists when they haven't provided you the criteria. So if no one's loved you enough to tell you the truth about atheism and atheist leaders, it's the same as someone refusing to tell you the truth about religionists and the religious leaders who never define the criteria according to which they prescribe things for others to do. And Jesus himself said they will lay heavy burdens on you but not lift a finger. So if an atheist, like a religionist, is willing to place a burden on you to prove God exists, according to what? I mean, I'm a Cherokee, and if a cowboy takes his pistol out and starts shooting at our feet to have us dance, eventually I would like to see laws passed and imposed upon people like that so I can walk about freely and live my life. So if you're getting caught in this web of nonsense, it's irrational, just stop and think for a minute and tell your atheist friend or whoever your professor might be or whoever thinks it's cute to say Christians can't prove God exists, just stop and say, well, just a moment, what is the criteria according to which this evidence for God would be achieved or nullified? And where have we failed to meet this criteria? Because I would never even entertain the idea of trying to perform for some religion who says, I just can't quite seem to be good enough to go to heaven. That's why we preach the gospel, so that in this lifetime men can come out from such things of futility and live freely and serve God and extend this justice to their neighbors and do it all for the glory of God and not be some slave to some exasperative system that's designed by its leaders to exasperate the participants, just like atheism is designed by the few leaders to exasperate those who try to prove God. We already have the evidence for God. And let them continue to negate God. Let them negate the instrumentality of the Bible in establishing the Western world as we know it. Let them negate the reality of the field called theology that produced branches such as physics, calculus, and chemistry. Let them debunk physics if you want to. Now, when you debunk physics and you can debunk calculus and you can debunk chemistry, and when you can rewrite history to show that the president of Harvard, for example, wasn't a Baptist preacher, when you can go and take and rewrite history to show that Baptists did not collaborate with the founding, the framers, the political scientists to disestablish religion in the United States so that taxes wouldn't be levied against free citizens to pay the salary of professional clergy. How ridiculous. So if you can go and undo all that, you have at it. But you go ahead and explain then, for example, I would be curious why you aren't exasperated, why you're not frustrated and emotional in trying to debunk physics and calculus, because you know that that's irrational. Why would you try to do that? Well, same for us. You're the one that's irrational, asking me to provide an evidence that meets an undefined criteria. So go back and do your homework. If you're an atheist and proud of it and you're smug because you can watch people exasperate trying to prove something to you, you kind of have a dark side of which you're not aware, and you won't be able to gratify yourself by leading God's people, especially Baptists. Don't mess with a Baptist. We're not the people you want to mess with. So, and also, if you're a religious leader, and you like to watch people struggle and toil in the futility of trying to meet the new standards or the new fallible construct or the new trend that has come along, the new trend of doctrine, so that you can just entertain yourself watching people being tossed to and fro. Well, just don't try that with Baptists, because there are Baptists out there trained, highly skilled, able to rightly divide the word of truth and reason at the highest level. So, again, I'll close with this, but until you can at least be honest and define, document, and disclose your criteria, then I can evaluate it and see. But what would that make the atheist if he's the one prescribing the criteria according to which my evidence is considered? Oh, that would make him God. So as long as he's God, he's okay with it. Similar to a religious person saying, well, we'll tell you what you must do and how to do it so that when life's over, we'll let you know if you entered into heaven or not. Oh, that makes you God. And Jesus said he was the way, the truth, and the life, and that no man comes to the Father except by him. So I'm free to know God through Christ Jesus, recognize no one between myself and God but Jesus Christ. As Landmark Missionary Baptist Church in Jacksonville, Arkansas, we live in the shadow of the largest C-130 base in the world, and we live freely there, protected from such silliness. And that's why it's laughable when someone feigns a disappointment in us if we don't use the Bible to support some fallible construct, because it's just an attempt to control and lord over others. So when they talk about lordship salvation, ask yourself, now, which Lord are we talking about? Because it looks like you are trying to lord over me and have me jump from one construct to the next construct and leave the context and the Bible meanings and or the Bible text and the Bible word meanings behind. So religionists and atheists have a lot in common. They love to prescribe for others what they themselves do not do, and then they love to watch people exasperate themselves in a futile effort to meet something that the poor soul may never even realized. What's the criteria first? Give me that. And once you have that, it would be remarkable. And please forward it to us, especially here for me, because I'd love to share it with Landmark Missionary Baptist Church and say, here's the criteria constructed from between the ears of atheists or religionists. And if we can somehow meet this criteria, they will approve the evidence for God. And, well, I'm an American too, so that's kind of something you really wouldn't get an American to do anyway, because an American's not going to try to prove to Sam Harris. I mean, I'd love to go to lunch with Richard Dawkins and listen to the man talk. I'd just say, but are you going to eat that? Or are we going to just sit here and waste time? Because I would love to eat lunch with him and tell him, welcome to our great country. And I would have loved to have met Christopher Hitchens, talk with him. I would love to talk to Samuel Dent. I mean, these people are, whatever they are, they're wonderful people. But what does it have to do with my unwillingness to play along with trying to meet their criteria that would determine whether or not I have evidence? I don't even have to have evidence, but we do. But according to whose criteria would it be considered evidential? So live in the freedom wherein Christ has called you. And you have a blessed day.